I think the concluding word were really a lead up, to the next session, on partnership. And let me thank again Marie Sallois, Director of Corporate and Sustainable Development. If I am to say something, I would say this. I think in the institutional title you're having, there is sustainable development, which is crucial for the future. So I think to a certain extent that you are not only as a director, the director of an orchestra, of a team, but you are also a director of the future. If you want to know more about Marie's work, you can take a look also at the Healthy Cities publication by Smart Cities and Sport, and take a look, if you want, on the website of the IOC, the Olympics.org, there is a publication also, Thomas Bach's speech, which he gave yesterday at Smart City and Sport, is published in full. So the next session is on building partnership, and let me invite slowly, the speakers, to join on a side. But before, let me say this, let me take a step back, and let me refrain on the reason why we're all here. There is a quote, I think you're most familiar, with the quote by Nelson Mandela, but I really think sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire, to unite people in a way that little else does. We spoke to the youth yesterday. Today we're thinking in terms of partnership. And in terms of partnership, we need to remember this. We need to remember that coming together is the beginning, staying together is progress, working together is success. Then there might be a fourth dimension, which is partnership, legacy, and many other layers. But before I give the floor to the next panel, there's a book I'd like to mention by a former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, a Canadian actually, so it's a tribute to you as well, our next moderator, Mark Carney, who's saying there is actually a disconnect between economic value and societal, or we can say here sports value. We don't need to be cynic, and he's saying a cynic is somebody who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. So let us value partnership, and let me invite Ariane Croteau, account executive of Quebec City Business Destination, on stage, and the floor is completely yours. Please.
Thank you very much. Bonjour à tous. Good morning, everyone here in Copenhagen. Special greetings to the people who are joining us virtually this morning. My name is Ariane Croteau. I'm the account executive for the sports market at Quebec City Business Destination. First of all, let me take a few seconds to thank Melanie, Danielle, and all the people at the Smart City teams for giving me this opportunity to be here with you today. It's a real honor to moderate this panel. The topic today is building partnership. I have saved the floor. Cities are the treasure chest where most sporting events are organized. Hosting events implies high-level facilities, of course, but as well a thoughtful event strategy linked with tourism, economic development, mobility policies, environment concerns, and legacy objectives. However, nothing is possible without strong partnership with sports federation and events organizers. And I think we all agree that the recent period has deeply disrupted both the existing benchmark and the anticipated schedule. So what is the future of major event bidding and hosting? Are rights holders increasingly tending to have a continuous dialogue with cities rather than launching bidding process? So that's what we're going to talk today in the upcoming 45 minutes. And I'm happy to have on stage with me this morning Mark Hust, competition bidding manager at World Athletics. Mark uses the joy of running to drive economic, social, and environmental progress among host cities. Mark is focused on contributing to the wider community by delivering high-impact, multi-threaded value using World Athletics Series event as a growth catalyst. Welcome, Mark. Al Kidd, President and CEO of the Sports Event and Tourism Association. Al joined Sport EDA in April 2017, bringing more than 35 years of advertising, risk management, executive leadership, and nonprofit experience to his role with the association. Thanks for joining us. we have Morten Sandnes, Secretary General of the Norwegian Wrestling Federation. Morten was responsible for hosting the World Wrestling Championship in Oslo in October 2021. And last but not least, joining us online, Birgitte Nestende, Manager Events at Innovation Norway. Birgitte was responsible for developing the national strategy, which was launched in December 2019. She's working to promote Norway as a host nation for major events, both within sport and cultural events. Well, thank you, Birgitte.
Hi.
Well, thank you everyone for accepting to share your experience with us today. As we agreed earlier, we'll make this session more like a discussion. So if you have any points that you want to add, feel free to jump at any time. To everyone attending this session here in Copenhagen today, we'll try to keep some minutes at the end. So if you have any question, feel free to do so as well. So let's start today the discussion by a quick video from World Athletics.
Oh, Lewis suddenly comes back and streaks for the line and gets there first. And it is Greta Weitz Indy.
Kostadinova can now attempt a new world record, and she's over.
What a powerful video, Mark.
I can take no credit for that.
No worries. From an IS perspective, we know that the last few months, well, things have changed. Could you please tell us how the pandemic have affected the way the bidding process is now occurring at World Athletics? How do you adapt your model? And what are the key learnings that you learned through that process?
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much for the kind welcome. It's great to be back in Copenhagen, a very forward-thinking and active city. So it's great to be here. And I guess without exaggeration, well, I scribbled down some notes during breakfast this morning, so I might rely on these a little bit for the first question. But I think without exaggeration, the pandemic has presented probably the most challenging environment in history for event bidding, for sports events, perhaps since World War II. So it's a challenging environment out there, but with challenge comes opportunity. and the opportunity for athletics is health is finally at the top of the agenda, at the top of the political agenda. So I guess since rebranding from the IAAF to World Athletics in the last 2 years, bidding has changed a great deal, and the pandemic has perhaps accelerated that change. And I noted kind of 4 main pillars to the change in our bidding process at World Athletics recently. 2 relate to what we do, and 2 relate to how we do. So the first pillar is event repositioning. We have to adapt in order to thrive. So we are reimagining our events for the experiential era that we live in today. And as you can see from the video there, which is very nicely portrayed by my talented broadcasting colleagues, there are huge improvements in the product that we are creating and the experience we're creating. And the second is maximizing the ROI. And this is about decreasing delivery costs without compromising quality. And it's about improving the value proposition. And I think maybe later we'll look at like how values is now defined and how that's evolved. Then the second, looking at how we do it through bidding. The third pillar is on objective evaluation. And we've defined criteria weighting and shared this with all of our candidates in advance of a bidding process. We've developed an evaluation marking scheme. So we've got a totally transparent, open, and objective assessment process in place, which I think is more important now, more than ever before. And then finally, the fourth pillar is on being totally bidder obsessed. Testing, hello? Hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. So the final pillar is on being totally bidder obsessed, and we've developed bid guides, setting out information about our events, letting bidders know about our vision, our values, the event identity, and our objectives, the impact of our events. And I think we might talk a little bit more later about being more proactive and communicating more with bidders. But being totally bidder obsessed is I think is really important, and how we engage with bidders going forward.
More on a dialogue approach and on a continuous basis, rather than just open for people to or city to come and say, well, we have an interest. You start upfront, starting the discussion and build on that relations that you're having with cities. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Birgit, we know that the pandemic has affected, well, everyone and forced organization. We saw what happened with World Athletics, but even cities or countries to redefine their priorities. It has changed the way organizations look at major event hosting, and many organizations are currently reviewing the strategies, reviewing their event hosting strategies. And in order to secure fundings now, even in the past, but we had to make sure that the event that we are targeting reflects those new strategies and those priorities. And in your case at Innovation Norway, you passed through that process, but even prior to the pandemic, so you were already in advance in that sense. So we can definitely use your expertise now and what your experience in the last month, but you launched a national event strategy in December 2019. So could you please just give us, in few words, a quick description about what is this strategy and what are the key pillars and how they impact bidding and funding in your country?
Hello from Oslo. Just a quick about our national strategy, which consists of 2 main pillars. It's on innovation and on sustainability. And what we mean with innovation is that we are looking into how can we implement innovation in the way that we carry out events. How can we use new technology? How can we sort of influence our event organizers to think outside the box to create new collaborations that can, in the end, increase value creation for events and on the impact on the region and on Norway as a whole. And when it comes to sustainability, it feels a little bit strange to say that it's one of the two main pillars, because sustainability, it has to underlie everything that we do. We talk about how sustainability is sort of like a default, how we approach everything that we do within our company. And I think that's very key as to how we are looking for events these days, because firstly, it's the right thing to do, but we also see that it increases the value and it increases the impact that these events have on our society and on our country. So how it sort of impacts the way that we are bidding for, I think, as reference to what Mark just said, we are looking for international federations and also national federations that share our view on these things, that we create a closer relationship, I think, with the federations, and maybe perhaps we have a more common goal, looking into what we aim to achieve with these events that we are bidding for. And we're looking for events that sort of fit this profile, that are flexible enough, that we can look to how can we implement innovation, how can we implement sustainability at a larger scale, how can they contribute to what we want for our country as a whole. And in terms of funding, we're probably going to talk more about that after, but we see that, at least in Norway, we don't have a large pool of money available for events that want to be organized. So we have to look for sort of other arguments, and sustainability is definitely a huge argument for how and why we are hosting events in Norway, because we don't have to do it, we don't need to do it, but we want to do it. And if we can look into how events can be used in terms of driving sustainability and driving value creation, that would be very positive. And many municipalities across our country are demanding a strategy on how is the events going to deliver on sustainability, on innovation, and on value creation and economic impacts, and all those other impacts as well. So we're looking to sort of enhance these impacts at a larger scale than we used to. Yeah, I think that was maybe the quick answer to that.
And what I think is really interesting is that those impacts, it's not only about economic value, but those impacts are taken into consideration at the beginning of the process, because that's the way you decide if the event is worth different kind of funding. But you have to think about innovation and sustainability, but at the early stage before bidding, correct?
Yes, that's correct. We're looking as early as possible to see if that will fit the profile, and how we can sort of enhance these impacts as well.
Thank you. And we have a good example of an event that happened in Norway. Morten is here. You hosted last October the World Wrestling Championships. And could you please, just for the audience, tell a few words about that event and how this event, because Norway is recognized as a cross-country or skiing country, wrestling, and how this event was part of that innovation and sustainability strategy.
Yes, I can talk a little bit about that. We hosted the Senior World Championships in wrestling in early October, just a little bit more than a month ago. When we first got into the idea of hosting the event 4 years ago, we, from the very start, needed to look at what can we get out of it except for the 9 fun days. What is the legacy? And it became very important for us to put down some goals on what to achieve afterwards, both financially, where Innovation Norway helped us out, because Birgitte didn't say much about it now, but they have what they call an arrangement calculator, where you feed in all the different numbers and you get out well, sort of accounting-wise numbers that how does this affect Norway or the city? But for us also, not quantifiable things were important to Norway, as I think goes for most, well, a lot of European countries, especially Western countries. We have gotten a lot of refugees over the past 15, 20 years, and wrestling is a very well-known sport. I would say to all countries that ends up with stan, it's probably their main sport. We had people in the stands, and myself too, being very surprised that we even had that many refugees and that they were even interested in wrestling. But this wrestling event made them very proud because it was their heroes being there, and it's hard to put a, what do you call it, price tag or measure what that was worth. But obviously, they got a lot out of that. And of course, we also used that when we recruited volunteers. And we could see that they were very proud of their country, and especially Iran, that did very well in the championship. And it was very fun to watch that. In addition, we used the championship to develop a training program for young leaders. It is not finished yet because we had a couple of weekends before the championship, and of course they got some very important roles during the championship with mentoring. And now after the championship we are preparing them to go into the clubs as young leaders. We also had an equality program that we have run and other programs like that on the side. And I have to say, if we hadn't been so occupied or concerned about these things, I think it would have been a lot harder for us to get the government support that we did. And actually, we can also see now that the UWW, or the International Federation, are looking into the same things when they are talking about next events, because I think we proved that this was important.
And that's really interesting, and I feel like you've been able to, it was not just a matter of economic impact, but a matter of bringing the people, all the community, not only the people that are born and raised in Norway, but all the community together as an inclusion factor and as an inclusion vector. So that's really interesting. And Mark was talking earlier about like implementing an approach that is more based on dialogue. And I think that's what you did when you were talking with Birgitte and the International Federation, because that's a new approach and new elements that you were bringing to the event. Was not just the competition, but you bring another aspect to it. And how does it help to create a synergy? Like this approach with the dialogue, do you feel like it created a synergy, like a stronger synergy between the cities, the national, international federation, all going toward the same goal?
Yes, obviously, and especially towards the city and the central government. Very, very important, and because, well, we should probably call it the impossible championship. It shouldn't have been possible to do with the COVID situation. But everybody is so happy about it, the city, the government, the International Federation, the athletes. So we've actually been asked to host it again pretty quickly. And I don't think that would have been an issue if we hadn't done all these side projects that we had. We knew from the very beginning, like I said, we could host a good 9 days, but it's all the side projects that's been topping on the.
That's really interesting. We'll come back to those type. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just jump in on that.
Oh,
if I can just jump in
Go
on that
ahead.
point, because I think to bid for an event, it involves a lot of stakeholders, right? And I think a key feature for us has been prospecting with this range of key stakeholders and understanding there's commonalities here, and we draw the different pillars of value and connect with them on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Thank you for jumping in. Al, this time, so far we've been talking about the national strategy in Norway and public funding, but from when we exchanged prior to that, the situation in the States is a bit different in terms of funding. And just to help our audience to understand how it works in the States, could you just explain a bit the difference between private funding in the States rather than public?
Sure, that's probably one of the most often asked questions by the international brethren when they want to come to the United States is how do we get people to help support it? And before I start, I want to give a shout out to my American counterparts back there, David and John. Thanks for traveling all the way across to listen to me talk. I appreciate that. The United States has been, this isn't right or wrong, this just happens to be the way that we do it, and we have a very uneven opening from COVID. We have 50 states with 50 governments, with 50 leaders and 50 funding mechanisms, and no federal overlay. So there isn't a single place to go to, so you end up negotiating either on a state-by-state or a city-by-city situation every single time you come in for an event. So whereas most, a lot of locations give funding to the national governing bodies and so forth, it just isn't that way in the United States. So most of the funding for sporting events takes place through the utilization of hotel and motel taxes. It's an incremental tax on the room nights of anywhere from about 12 to 18% depending on location. And that funding goes into the Convention and Visitors Bureau or the State Tourism Office, and they can utilize that for different aspects of tourism generation. And typically it goes for marketing or personnel that can generate more tourism. Hasn't been utilized often for bid fees. On the marquee events that John and David and some of the people in the United States look at, the bigger events, a different structure. They go out and they raise money privately. Our LA bid right now for the Olympics in 28, there's a major initiative going on trying to raise capital. So that's done mainly through corporations and trying to generate it on the private side. On the public side, there is an initiative that we've been driving among the states to organize kind of a state sport tourism activity where they build enterprise funds funded by the state governments on a state-by-state basis. So right now there's 30 of those across the United States, 30 of the 50. By the way, our 50 states don't get along with each other, so we can't do an overlay. So what ends up happening is it's very uneven. And so we have some states that have $5 million available. Now that's just not for an event, that's for everything from youth sports to marquee events and for every city in that state. Texas has near $200 million. So our FIFA bids from Texas, that fund has contributed or has offered up $70 million to each the Houston and the Dallas funds. So uneven, depending on where you want to go, there is capital available and there is capital available in the private sources, but cities, destinations don't subsidize sporting events in the United States.
So it's a totally different approach. Do you see that it's more getting closer to a balance with the pandemic? Like you see more public funding in Europe, it used to be less in the United States. Do you see, like with pandemic and the change that everything that's happening, do you feel more like it's returned to center? Kind
of? Possibly, that's the hope. Hope's not a great strategy, but that's the hope. One thing that is happening in the United States right now is that non-marquee events, primarily youth events. We commissioned a major study in the United States in 2019. We're going to do a 21 update. And we determined there was about 15 billion with a B US dollars generated through youth sports tournaments. 5 billion in tournament fees. So that's a very aggressive, big number. What's happening is bid fees are coming down from marquee events all the way to the youth tournaments with 250 teams participating, and they're asking for bid fees. So that aforementioned small fund that I talked about absorbs some of those bid fees for the youth tournaments because typically with our industry kind of formulated around hotel taxes, they regenerate tax money into the communities. And so the US model is broadening on the ask by rights holders. And there's hope that the states will continue to elevate their contributions to be able to solicit bids. We have an aggressive program right now to try and bring international events to the market. So there are cities right now that can compete better, but it's just not general across the board.
Okay, and I think, Morten, you want to add something?
Just sort of a question, actually, back to you, Al. But for all our side projects, of course, that was well taken in the government. But it was also very crucial to get sponsors at our event because that's in the bottom. Is that the same with your contributors here? That the side projects, the legacy is important?
Absolutely, and thanks for asking that question. As I said, the main driver had always been the economic side of the hotel monies coming into the destinations. But finally, you know, of the 9 legacies that Kansura mentioned from Tokyo, only one was tourism, and the other 8 were sustainable, were legacy, were things that you all do on a regular basis. Physical education in school is a novelty in America. Here, it's in many countries, it's mandated. So what's happened during COVID, of course, with hotels, no stays, there was no money, so convention bureaus almost went out of business, and sponsorship dollars were suppressed. Right now, that door is open in the US, and they're looking for inventory to invest in, and a big part of it is the change in investment to sponsorship is around legacy. What kind of events can we do for youth? What kind of events can we do for social issues? Social issues have been overlaid. You know, the guys in the US that bid on the marquee events, they're used to all aspects of the bid, sustainability, green initiatives, you know, social issues, but now it's filtering down. So that's where some of the sponsor money tends to want to go because they get their visibility longer than just the few days that the event takes place.
Go ahead.
I think as well as the geographical distinction on the funding model, there's also an event-specific distinction here. Certainly we find from our World Championships, our marquee event, which will be obviously predominantly publicly funded, compares significantly to our road running championships, which is predominantly privately funded because, you know, that's quite often, you know, a profit-making event.
Yeah, perfect. And that leads us to actually the other question. That's a really good point. We see right now that there's no model that fits all in terms of fundings, but also in terms of impact. And in the past, we were often talking about the economic impact of that event. It brings that, and that was one of the main decision factors. But more and more, and we've seen it in your strategy in Norway or in the dialogue that you're talking about, there are other impacts that have to be taken into consideration: sustainability, innovation. So when we talk about those impacts, how do we value and how do we measure them? So, Birgit, your international event strategy, what is your definition of success, or how do you measure those kind of new impacts that you're actually promoting?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We are working on a better measurement tool. I'm having a meeting tomorrow actually about that, to look into how can we measure these social impacts on with a better common ground. So we're looking at the International Association of Event Hosts impact standard, and also the OECD, and taking those into consideration, because, you know, the economic impact is quite easy to measure. We've done that for years, as Morten mentioned, and we also have a climate calculator, so we can measure the climate impact of events. But the social impacts are much more difficult to measure. But I think one of the success criteria, difficult to measure or not, is that it's put the strategy and the focus on sustainability innovation has put it on the agenda at a much larger scale. So we see now that many event organizers are taking this into their own strategies. They are looking into how can we measure the impact on the climate, how can we do certifications for our events. That also includes the social impact of the event, as well as the environmental and the economic impact as well. So I think one success criteria is just that it's on the agenda is a big leap forward, I think. But we are looking into much better measurement tools as well.
We have to start somewhere, so that's a good point. Yeah. And thank you for bringing that aspect. And you talk a bit about the success, Al, when you're talking, but your members, your organization, you have members that are private destination hotels. How do you create value to those members when you talk to them?
Our membership is kind of unique in a way that we have over 500 city destinations that we serve. We have over 250 event rights holders that we serve. And we have a little over 100 lodging institutions, technology companies, leadership, you know, all kinds of. So we have a wide variety of things we have to serve. So one of the things that has been the kind of the historic landmark around measurement has been hotel stays, heads and beds, the old heads and beds story. And that's what the Convention and Visitors Bureaus across America, 95% of their funding is heads and beds. They almost went out of business. Many did. Most went from 30, 40 people down to 2 or 3. So they're going to recover over the next couple of years. Sports is different. Sports is part of the fabric of America. Fabric of the world, really. Almost every kid at some point plays some level of sport, whether any good or not, they have participated or they know about it. So we've been leading the charge on what we're calling a balanced scorecard to diversify the definition of success, because the people that care about other factors besides hotel stays are the politicians. I've never had a politician miss a ribbon cutting at a new field that opened up, but I've never had a politician go to a meeting where 30,000 ophthalmologists were there. They just don't go. So what we're looking at is our balanced scorecard, which is a toolbox we're developing. And we know about the IEH. I serve on their board, and so we've helped Ian with some of his programming. But we're looking at a number of factors. Economic impact, both direct and indirect spending, which is about job creation and building. The second is social and digital aggregation and value. Third is sponsorship activation value. The fourth is earned media. We've added a community and resident sentiment pillar to that. And the last we've just added is the, and look, I'm not a technology expert, but I've learned a lot. I do know that your cell phone right now pings a tower somewhere, because we're tracking geofencing around event activity so we can see actually what the migration is when people come to events or come to a sporting event, to see where they go for either outbound advertising push or inbound information. So that will be aggregated in this next year into a product that we're going to push, and we're out there evangelizing it now. When I look behind me on the limb, there's only me. There's not many behind it, but we're going to be vigilant about it. And so our definition of success is this ever-widening proof that sport is much wider, closer to the legacies that you all do here for the actions that we've seen so far today.
Yeah, no. Just one thing I wanted to pick up on your introduction, where you talked about host cities being treasure chests. And I think, believe me, that sport's not the treasure, impact is. And I think we're now finding a lot more cohesion across those pillars of what impact is, what value is, across economic, social, environmental, and kind of this image reputation. And at World Athletics, what we rely on is ASWAF's recent report on common indicators. And we were kind of fortunate to be a part of creating that paper and that report. And we then demonstrate it in our bid guides and on our webinars, what impact each event has in those 4 pillars.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's not to summarize things, but one thing that's also a little mind-boggling for me is that when we try to go back the last couple of championships to well, for instance, find out what is your budget. How can we build our budget, because we needed to work with budget. The previous organizers, they looked strangely at me because we don't have a budget. The government pays, because we are a so-called Western country, and we do rely on budgets. We do rely on sponsorships, and we do rely on the legacy. Well, there are so far other organizers that is not that concerned about those things. So what will be interesting in the future now is will the international federations or IOC or whoever it is, will they look more into those kind of things as well in those countries?
And you're talking about legacies, and do you have, I think it's always interesting to have like concrete example of what you bring to an event or to increase those social impacts, either from the IFs or your event. I don't know if you have any example you want to share.
No, not really. But I've talked a lot about what we wanted to sit with. But some countries, they host a championship because of policy. They want to get their country or their leadership recognized somehow. We have other values that we use. And the interesting thing in the future is how will the international federation, like I said, value these two things up against each other.
I think it's a cyclical process here, where we're judged on what impact we have, and we can talk to bidders on the impact we have. So that has to be built into our evaluation process. That's how we have, run successful bidding processes. And I think in terms of impact from some of our events, again, circling back to this message of health being at the top of the agenda in politics. Looking at our road running championship that was held in Copenhagen in 2014, 4,000 people competed in the first half marathon for the first time. 1,000 people joined running clubs before the event. 1,800 joined them after the event, and we were talking at dinner last night.
Exactly.
Some people just need that catalyst to get moving, to get active, and you ran the Lausanne Marathon and started a running routine.
Yeah, with the smart cities. That was an invitation from Melanie, yeah.
So I think the social aspect, the health aspect, bringing communities together, we have to reflect that within our evaluation in order to have impactful events going forward.
That's really interesting. Do you want to add something else, or are you ready for some question? Do we have any question in the room? Don't be shy. Yeah. The mic is coming.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Laura from ISCA, International Sport and Culture Association. I was wondering if there's any kind of strategy for unifying the bidding procedures and all of this impact measurement across different federations. Would you have any information on that? Or is each federation kind of developing their own systems and impact measurement and what success means?
Certainly, I think from World Athletics, we reverse engineer from the impact. And that's how we define our evaluation processes and how we weight the various criteria within that evaluation process.
So I have more a comment than a question, but to your question, there are many different initiatives within the Olympic movement as we speak to actually try to better measure the impact and legacy of various events. So there is one initiative, we are trying to connect the dots. So through my team here, Tanya Braga and the team, we're working on this with Paris 2024, with OECD, as it was mentioned, and with friends from the federations from ASWAF. So I believe actually it would be a good idea when we meet next year to have a dedicated session on that, because I think more to come and in more consolidated way. So happy to continue the discussion with my team and the various stakeholders with whom we work.
Well, thank you, everyone. That ends our session. I really want to thank every one of you. Birgit, thank you for joining us online. Some of us will still be here later on today, so if you have any questions, feel free to do so. But I really want to thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being so transparent in your answers. So that was a real pleasure. Thank you, everyone.